Hi, Lion Cubs. This is Mrs. Oberg. Today we're going to work on finding the problem and solution in a story. Remember, the problem is something that goes wrong or something that happens to one of our characters. Our solution is how we can solve the problem. Sometimes the characters can solve their own problems, and sometimes they need help from other characters to solve their problems. The story we're going to read today has two characters, and you'll see that these two characters help each other solve the problem in the story. So let's get started and listen to the story. Remember, it's important to be listening so you can hear, what's the problem and how can we solve that problem? Today's story is called A Lost Button from Frog and Toad Are Friends by Arnold LaBelle. Toad and Frog went for a long walk. They walked across a large meadow. They walked in the woods. They walked along the river. At last they went back home to Toad's house. "Oh, drat," said Toad. "Not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of the buttons on my jacket." Oops, so as the reader I'm thinking, ooh, he lost something. Maybe that is part of the problem. Let's keep reading and find out. "Don't worry," said Frog. "We will go back to all the places we walked. We will soon find your button." They walked back to the large meadow. They began to look for the button in the tall grass. So that was me thinking, maybe this might be the solution. Let's read and find out. "Here's your button," cried Frog. "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button is black. My button was white." Toad put the black button in his pocket. A sparrow flew down. "Excuse me," said the sparrow. "Did you lose a button? I found one." "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button has 2 holes. My button has 4 holes." Toad put the button with 2 holes in his pocket. They went back to the woods and looked on the dark paths. "Here's your button," said Frog. "That's not my button," cried Toad. "That button is small. My button was big." Toad put the small button in his pocket. A raccoon came out from behind a tree. "I heard that you were looking for a button," he said. "Here is one that I found." "That's not my button," wailed Toad. "That button is square. My button was round." Toad put the square button in his pocket. Frog and Toad went back to the river. They looked for the button in the mud. "Here's your button," said Frog. "That's not my button," shouted Toad. "That button is thin. My button was thick." Toad put the thin button in his pocket. He was very angry. He jumped up and down and screamed, "The whole world is covered with buttons, and not one of them is mine." Toad ran home and slammed the door. There on the floor he saw his white, 4-holed, big, round, thick button. "Oh," said Toad, "it was here all the time. What a lot of trouble I've made for Frog." Toad took all the buttons out of his pocket. He looked in his sewing box. He took his sewing box down from the shelf. Toad sewed a few buttons all over his jacket. The next day, Toad gave his jacket to Frog. Frog thought it was beautiful. He put it on and jumped for joy. None of the buttons fell off. Toad had sewed them on very well. This story, A Lost Button, is unique because it has more than one problem with more than one solution. So it's going to be your job to think of the problem and the solution that you heard from the story. Let's try and think of one together. I'm going to use my whiteboard to help me. You can use a piece of paper, or if you have a whiteboard, anything you can write on. So on the top, I wrote problem and solution. That's something that you'll need on your paper too. To make it easy, I'm just going to draw a line right in the middle to separate so I know where I'm writing my problem and my solution. If I'm thinking about the story, I might want to think of a problem that happened in the story. We'll think of one problem together. One problem I thought of that we heard at the very beginning of the story was Frog lost his button. So we're going to write that first. I'm going to write it under problem. Frog, oops, and I made a mistake because frog should have a capital F to show that it's a name, a proper noun. So I'm going to fix that. Frog lost his button. And that's a complete sentence. I can put a period at the end. What was the solution to him losing his button? We can think about what he did, what the other characters did. How did they try and solve his problem of him losing his button? One solution, you're right, was they went to look for his button. So we're not sure if they found it yet. Maybe we're not that far in the story, but we know Frog lost his button. That was a problem. And one way they thought to solve it was they looked for his button. So we can put Frog. Oh, remember, Frog has a capital F. And Toad, that has another capital for a proper noun. Frog and Toad went to search for his button. A period at the end. This is a time if you want, you can pause your video to make sure yours matches mine. I'm going to add one more thing to keep my work nice and neat. I'm going to put a line here on the bottom. So I know that this problem goes with this solution. Now it's your job to think of one or maybe two other problems with solutions that you heard in this story. Remember, sometimes one problem can have more than one solution. After you find some more problems and solutions, make sure you have it written down to share with your teacher. I can't wait to hear what you thought of. Keep up the hard work.